to follow the emerging information,
But you
the
weren't.
emerging
Right.
data.
You said weeks and months, but we're talking years, and
Yeah.
you knew what it was because you came out and said what it was. What are we standing up for? The ability, the freedom to do what's right as God defines that right.
God's the ultimate author of liberty.
We don't want government to stand between us and our freedom to do what is right.
All right, finally, we've got an apology for COVID
It appears so.
and its response. So today we're going to look at some of these and see
quotes.
if these are real apologies for this planned pandemic, right? And the horrible panned response. Some of them are saying, "Oh, we didn't do that well." Well, was it just was it a trial run for something else? I think we need to look at these things, especially as Bible believers. This is the Bible Nation Podcast, Season 2, Episode 10, Apologies for COVID Responses. I'm Doug Levesque with the Bible Nation Society. You can check out our podcasts and see all of our materials on BibleNation.org. I'm here in the studio today with Tony Nash, owner, president of AZ Business Solutions. Tony, good to have you. What's going on in your business world? I hear you're going to go out of state and there's going to be a teachers convention and you're going to be convincing them that they need to do business with you.
Yeah. No, it's always good to be here.
Yeah.
Business is going good. Yeah, there is a 5-state teachers convention.
Cool.
About 1,400 teachers registered. So we're
that's
going to go
amazing.
present our business to the administrators as well as sell some gear to some teachers. And
Yeah, but they invited you to actually come and do a little bit of speaking.
yeah, I got 2 workshops talking about branding your school for excellence and a social media boot camp just to kind of help these ministries and schools kind of get the word out there about what they're doing. And so, I'm excited about it.
That's neat, though. I mean, to go as a businessman, but then to also get to help minister to these teachers because, social media is something they're dealing with every day.
100%.
They're trying to teach some truth, foundational truths, and kids are coming in like, no, that's not it.
Yeah,
and they
exactly.
because my favorite rapper said otherwise, and what's going on, and they got to do.
Who
with
is your
that,
favorite rapper?
Yeah, my favorite rapper.
Yeah.
I like the yellow cellophane around a Big Mac.
Okay, that is a good
That
rapper.
is my favorite rapper. So don't ask me to rap, Tony, because I people might turn away.
That'll be on another episode.
That'll be another episode of that. Okay. All right. Our friend Pastor Jason Georges got to travel and go down to Florida for a conference and a meeting, and so we'll miss him. He'll be back in our next podcast series. Well, first I think we need to do is there's been just a stream of all the personalities we were watching every day as COVID was going by, and they were authorities, and they were coming out authoritatively and saying, this is what's going on, and here's how it's going, and they were producing data and facts. And there's been a stream of them coming out now saying, sorry, we were wrong, we could have done it better, we should have done it better, we were doing it wrong, we found that there was a wrong culture, we need to change it. Well, what does that mean?
Yeah.
2.5
years of misery
Yeah.
for a large portion of the world.
And we're talking,
and you're just going to come out and say, oops, and this is what we've been worried about and saying this isn't right. And and now it's just like casually, we just didn't quite.
unprecedented.
It's not like putting the wrong amount of salt, on your burger.
And then there were congressmen, there were business people, there were religious people. People were coming out and saying, this is unprecedented. The math doesn't make sense. What are you saying? And they stuck to the narrative. There was a narrative. They're apologizing now in not so many words. Nobody's saying I'm sorry. They're just
publicly shamed anyone that questioned it.
Yes.
I mean, you are an horrible, evil, unloving, hateful person if you question anything.
The response cost lives.
100%.
Their response cost lives. People lost their jobs.
Yep.
People lost their businesses.
Thousands of businesses.
In fact, I listed off like what were the consequences. I said old people died, young people had after effects, businesses closed, hospitals were overrun. They separated you when you were in the hospital. You couldn't have a family member with you.
Died alone.
You died alone. Education was suspended and changed. Kids lost 2 years of school.
Kids are behind.
Right.
More than they already were.
What were they doing at home without their parents on the computer? I mean, God knows what. Families were separated. They were divided over the issue. Religious liberty was challenged. Churches closed. The media became patsies altogether for this thing, right? They thought they were doing some sort of benevolent work. The military losses were 50,000 plus because they wouldn't get the mandates.
Right.
And so they got what do they call it? Their discharges were not honorable. They were dishonorable discharges. Yeah. They lost their benefits. Some guys that are officers and they had retirements, they lost all of that
because they wouldn't get the vaccine.
So it affected education, military. Laws were suspended. Laws were created and laws were suspended based upon, well, we're not going to follow these FDA laws now. We're going to just hurry and rush this stuff through. So everyone getting pricked was an experiment.
Yeah.
Because the laws had been suspended. Nothing had been thoroughly tested. We were the test during that concept. Mask people made a lot of money, right? Good mask, bad masks.
Mask industry.
Yeah, good mask, bad mask.
Yeah.
I mean, old socks. I mean, whatever, masks. Bleach. The bleach people made some money during this, right?
Yes.
Vitamins.
Disinfectants.
Oh, vitamin D people, you are in, man. You made some money, right?
Well, ivermectin made some money too.
Yeah.
Not that they wanted it to, but
yeah. Stores were emptied, right? People were collecting toilet paper and staples. Prices rose. Jobs were lost. Workers had to go home, never to go back to work again. Now we've got a job crisis.
And an employee shortage.
Yeah. The ports were stacked up, still are stacked up. Cities burned as a result of this. Elections were muddied with, maybe overturned,
minimum,
right? And so there were all kinds of issues. Remember, only essential businesses.
Yeah.
Food, drink, and medicine.
Yeah.
So you had clothers starting to sell water and donuts, and people were just kind of trying to circumnavigate the whole thing. Barbers, you couldn't go get your hair cut, and so business owners were arrested. They were fined. They were mocked. Right? People were forced to have to go online and compete with Amazon, which you can't. So Amazon made bazillions from the thing. Banks began to be more intrusive, following people's money and online data collection. There came out mandates. First, it was just, hey, 4 weeks, let's stay safe. It was just peer pressure. Right?
2 weeks to slow the spread.
Yeah, masks, distancing, wash your hands, stay home from school. Only certain workers, doctors and police can go out. Pastors were arrested. Churches were shut. Police showed up in these things. People were mocked, doctors, nurses, professionals, for using hydrochloroquine, ivermectin, vitamin C, D, zinc, and antibiotics, and yet this is exactly what was helping people get over what was going on, and yet it was mocked. And so the medical industry
threatened to lose their license.
And then they mandated shots and inoculations, which absolutely is Nazi. And 4 or 5 boosters. And they're still doing it. And these people who are about to apologize are the same people that have been, quote unquote, in this medical tyranny power since the first Bush. 4 years of Bush, 8 years of Clinton, 8 years of Bush, 8 years of Obama, 4 years of Trump, and now 2 years of Biden. Of course, Biden's been there the whole time. Right. 34 years. 34 years Fauci has been in charge. Basically, he's got this private business that is funded by the federal government to do this. He has been messing with viruses. He has been diverting funds for virus studies. Even the so-called Wuhan labs. And he was questioned on this in front of Congress.
Oh, yeah.
And so this is not conspiracy theory, right? This is it. People began to get their temperatures checked everywhere on their forehead. Yep. Right? Kind of antichrist, like show your number.
Yeah.
Is it under or over 98.6, right? Mandatory testing, swabs up your nose. If you were positive, stay home. Lost wages, can't travel. False positives, be damned in that. Military healthcare workers were fired for noncompliance. Divisions among families and friends, all over the mandates. We suspended
division amongst people as a whole.
As a whole, divided our country, burning
100%.
cities over it. We suspended laws to rush products. That was all federally funded. Rapidly creating new machines. Remember the breathing machines? We had to make 500 bazillion thousand of that. And then I thought about the positive. Well, the positive pressure, the kind of the attitude of, well, don't you care about your grandma and grandpa? It's shame, using shame, care for only the self.
Yeah,
that's what they're doing. Like they're trying to shame us, but they're only caring about their own life, and it becomes accusatory, conspiracy theories, crazies discredited, And then government money spent on advertising,
billions,
putting up doctors and preachers and old people getting the shot. Remember that?
I do.
All government money. And then government money went out so you could get loans for your mortgages and businesses, and people signed on and found out, hey, that money wasn't free. That money came with, and so many people were scandalous with it. And so many people ended up losing their houses because they couldn't pay their mortgage because they were out of work, and they said, we'll give you this loan. Everybody signed on, and then they found out what? Well, no, that was 3, 4, 5, 6 months that you have to pay us back now.
Yeah.
And so,
and then once determined that these executives that were making all these mandates, in many states determined it was unconstitutional, the mandates were rescinded, and then the health department became weaponized to do the exact same thing. And now we're all not even answering to our elected official, but we're answering to this government agency in the schools, in our businesses, in our homes, separating kids from their families. Not to mention the mental health crisis that it created, and a historical record number of suicides.
And I think someone ought to stinking apologize. Like a real apology.
A real apology.
Like I got taken.
But how do you even apologize for something like that?
I want to say this. I mean, Trump was in on this.
Yeah.
And his son-in-law Kushner was in charge of this response. Now, they put Pence out at first because they thought conservatives would listen to Pence. But Pence, why did you go out there and do all that?
Yeah.
And so those of us that right away said, this doesn't make sense. This doesn't add up. This is a bologna sandwich. You know, this is an old rotten, stinky bologna sandwich.
We've seen viruses before.
Yes.
We've seen viruses that were more deadly than this one was proving to be, even in the short amount of time we knew about it. And there was never a response like this. So what was happening?
Yeah.
You know, and even when you look at someone like Trump, you wonder, did Trump know? Was he part of the big agenda?
Right.
Was he just duped?
Right.
Was he just trying to hold on to political power? Who knows? But somebody, the people involved with this have a lot of explaining to do. And will history show, you know, what really happened? Who knows?
And the wokeness and the fire and burnings in the street, and, you know, this kid had a gun and he shot them and they shot that. That was all a part of this. That was all a part of this, and not responded to. So all these consequences, who's going to pay for that? Who's going to answer for that? Who's going to lose their job for that? Who's going to respond to that? And so that's why all these so-called apologies that were marketed it as, oh, these apologies came out. I want us to listen to them because they're hardly apologies.
Right.
There's hardly any dealing with the consequences. There's hardly any ownership.
And the sad thing is this. You could read that list off, and that was a great list. Yeah. You could read that list off to a large percentage of our population.
Yeah.
And they would say, well, it was because of a health crisis. Excuse it away with that's it. And that's what you're going to hear these guys say. You know?
I know Governor Whitmer's coming out, and she's running and saying, we've been through it, and it's been tough.
Yeah, we've been tough Michiganders.
But we've been tough, and we'll be tough again.
Yeah.
And it's like, no, these were things you did.
Right.
These are responses you made. We could have done better. I like to listen to the underside of their apologies, because really they're saying we're gonna change the culture. We're getting rid of some people and all that. And I think who they're getting rid of is, this was a trial run, didn't work perfectly, but we're getting ready for the next one, and it's going to be done better and differently.
Yeah, certainly feels like that.
Yeah. So let's listen. The first one is Mr. Fauci. We're going to start listening to this interview about minute 40 in, and we'll listen to probably about 3.5 minutes of him.
When is this video from, by the way? Is this recent?
These are all recently, within months. Within a month or two.
With regard to things done differently, you know, David, that question gets asked appropriately all the time. And what I try to explain to the public
what could we have done
is that when you are dealing with the unknown, an evolving outbreak of a virus that you don't have a lot of information about, as the weeks and months go by, you have to be flexible enough to follow the emerging information, the emerging data.
You said weeks and months, but we're talking years, and you knew what it was because you came out and said what it was.
Right. And everybody could see without the data that you had access to that this wasn't right. Of course, they wouldn't release the data.
We found out later that you knew exactly what this was.
Yeah.
You'd already talked about this.
Yeah.
In order to make decisions that relate to everything from recommendations to guidelines. About what to do. And as we always say, if we knew then in January and early February and then into March of 2020 what we know now, clearly there would have been things that we did differently,
Okay,
particularly
so what you know
a
now
full
was not what you said you knew.
Right.
of the nature of how this virus spreads, its extraordinary capability of transmitting, which we didn't fully appreciate. The
Which is
fact
a lie, because that's
that
what you
50 to
studied.
60%
That's what you spent your own
of
money
the
on.
Your
transmissions
whole life study.
occur
Your whole life study.
from a
40
person who
years,
has no
6
symptoms
presidents.
at all, but who is infected. That is a huge issue that would have changed a few things, as well as the fact that this is aerosol spread, not just by the kind of droplets that generally are spread by other respiratory
He absolutely
infections
knew.
such as
This
flu.
is not an apology.
So
This
it
is
gets down to the
excuses.
things you
That
have
was
to
known
be
in the first
flexible
30
enough
days.
Yeah.
and humble enough to realize that you don't know everything right in the beginning.
Oh, geez.
And
Humble
you've
enough
got to
to
make
realize. I
decisions
think he
based
knew
on the
everything
data
from the
as it
beginning.
evolves. And
I
when
do
the
too.
data changes and the information
The
changes,
data and information
you have to
change.
adapt to it.
You have to adapt to it. But you're changing. You're the one putting together the data.
Right.
And you're making
compiling
decisions
it.
based on your own data. So
Yeah.
this is, I mean, I can't believe this guy. Does he really believe that we believe what he's shoveling?
I mean, but you and I don't believe it.
Right.
But a lot of people believe it. That video has, I don't know, how many views does that video have? 1,900. I guess not that many.
Well, I'm saying there's a lot
But
of
still,
people. There's
yeah.
a lot of news outlets that showed this.
But I think even liberals are tired of hearing from Fauci because he's just.
I mean, he's supposed to quit, but we're still interviewing him. But this, this particular thing is Fauci reflects on it. As I reflect, but I don't think you're reflecting as like, if I knew then what I knew now, I think that's a lie.
He's just backstepping. That's it.
And so it's couched as an apology. All right, let's go to the next one. This is the CDC director, Dr. Walensky. And remember, she came out
Start that one from the
like
beginning.
some sort of Star Wars villain.
Yeah.
In all the things she was saying, she was saying like we need to take over the world and people need to be quiet and we need to. I mean, it was Nazi-like.
The
mandates.
CDC mishandled the COVID pandemic. Its messaging was confusing and overwhelming. Time and time again, the agency did not act quickly enough, and now it's in need of a drastic overhaul. And that's the message today from the CDC's own director, Dr. Rochelle Walensky.
Wow.
In a statement, she wrote, "For 75 years, CDC and public health have been preparing for COVID-19. And in our big moment, our performance did not reliably meet expectations.
You think?
My goal is a new public health action-oriented culture at CDC that emphasizes accountability, collaboration, communication, and timeliness."
Oh, there we go.
Just last hour, White House COVID
It all
response
goes
coordinator
away.
Dr. Ashish Jha told NBC's Nightly News that the CDC, without a doubt, fell short.
Let's remind ourselves that Dr. Walensky, the director of the CDC, asked for this review of the CDC. I think that review was very well done. It laid out areas where the CDC needs to improve. And the bottom line is that she's committed to making those changes. And I think that's really important. Our government agencies weren't designed to manage a once-in-a-century crisis like this. And I think while many of them performed admirably, there's no question in my mind that these agencies could have done better.
Okay, so all the consequences that we read are based upon Fauci saying, well, if we only would have known.
Yeah.
She's saying, well, we done this review and we just weren't ready. We couldn't have done that.
Right.
But all that time, you're laying out mandates like you're God Almighty.
Right, and they call them recommendations now. We were making recommendations.
Yeah,
No.
So this is a rewriting of history here in what's going on. And the drastic changes that Walensky wants, and I think we've got another 20 seconds here. The drastic things she wants, recreating a culture, how do you do that? You fire and rehire people in your likeness and image.
Right.
That's what's going on.
And it was a coordinated response. It wasn't just like a few people were saying it. Like this was a coordinated.
That's why I put it in this order. We got Dr. Fauci, everybody knows, Dr. Walensky. When we get to Dr. Birx, she builds upon this. So
in pretty broad terms, Dr. Walensky laid out a plan to improve the agency. She says it needs to start prioritizing public health instead of focusing so much time on publishing academic papers. She didn't give many specifics, but the CDC director did acknowledge that leadership changes are coming.
And politicization is what was going on there. So now you're going to try to unpoliticize it now? I mean, that's just crazy. Now we're going to go to Dr. Birx. That's the blonde female that was kind of running things and giving her speeches or whatever. And this one's about 4 minutes, but I want you to listen to what she talks about, particularly in where they were getting data from. In other words, all the data was just bogus data. It was from somewhere else. We were coming up with data, just in the air.
Oh yeah.
And so she's admitting that was bogus. But let's listen to
Last week, the head of the
Dr.
Centers for
Birx.
Disease Control, Dr. Rochelle Walensky, announced a complete systemic overhaul of the agency, citing its botched COVID response. For more on those proposals and other ongoing viral outbreaks, Margaret spoke earlier with Dr. Deborah Birx, a former CDC official who served as coronavirus response coordinator under former President Trump.
Good morning, Dr. Birx.
Good morning, Margaret. Great to be with you.
This was an incredible acknowledgement by the CDC director just a few days ago about the agency that she runs. And Dr. Walensky said to CDC employees, to be frank, quote, "We are responsible for some pretty dramatic, pretty public mistakes, from testing to data to communications. This is our watershed moment." And she outlined these proposed changes to institutional culture, accountability, communication, timeliness.
And of course,
do you agree,
the narrative is,
doctor, with her diagnosis?
Yeah.
That's the
I'm
narrative.
thrilled that she had Jim McCrae and did this work, because a lot of directors would have just tried to
sells scarves at Macy's.
and tweaking the agency at this point was not going to be successful. This is an inflection point.
And they have to be approved still by the HHS secretary. I mean, do you think that it is enough for a bureaucracy to try to fix itself, or does Congress need to step in and legislate here?
Good question.
Well, there's certain things that Congress needs to do, and the number one thing is to stop trying to create a parallel data system. In many countries, the public health system and the clinical system are one. In our country, they have been separate, and it has failed us.
Back in January of 2021, when we spoke, I remember you saying you didn't trust the CDC data that you were getting during the Trump administration. So if Dr. Walensky's saying that this is a problem, how does she actually fix it? Are you saying that the government can't do it alone, that it needs private industry to step in?
Yes, and that was the way we were able to get the data. First and foremost, in March of 2020, all of our data that I used to warn Americans of who was at risk for severe disease, hospitalization, and death came from our European colleagues.
European colleagues. Okay, stop. We got to stop that, number one. Number one, Europe is secondary to us in everything across the board.
Yeah.
Even our girls are prettier. Yeah. Right? I mean, so we're going to go to
Better
Europe.
teeth.
Right, which is bureaucracy heavy, which is politicized completely, which is socialist, which is socialized medicine, which means even their data is politicized.
Right.
And that's what we're using.
Yep.
And she said we had to go to private industry to get real data, which means a free market system could have beat this hands down across the board if that's really what it was.
Right. If we really wanted to know the answer.
But now everybody's smiling about the CDC remaking. What are they remaking? They're remaking a European system that doesn't compete with our own system, so that we have the European response that's going on. That's what she's saying. But anyways, go ahead. Keep going.
Our system. Secondly, reporting was coming in extraordinarily slow from hospitals through a system that CDC had created. And I know this created controversy, but for 3 months, I asked the CDC to fix its system and develop a partnership with clinics and hospitals and laboratories, and they wouldn't. And so that's why I asked all the hospitals to start reporting, and they did. And so I think sometimes we hold ourselves back. The private sector is willing to help us. Another issue I've had with the CDC, I've asked them over and over again, if you're going to issue guidance, like the 5 days and return to work in a mask, show the data transparently that you utilize to come to that decision.
Right.
Because I think when Americans saw that it was a very small number,
so she's being forthright,
that they would have
only
really
after the CDC
reconsidered those guidelines. And so you really need the information. Americans are smart. They can process the information, give them all of the data.
Sorry, to pick up on what you just said, you are saying that the current CDC guidance of being able to return to work after 5 days if you wear a mask is based on flawed data?
Well, it's
all based
on what we call in medicine a convenience data set, rather than all Americans. We've had millions and millions of infections, and we could have tracked Americans over that time period. We could have said to people, test on day 3, test on day 6, test on day 9. they would have seen that the antigen test was still positive in most cases out to 9, 10,
How many
and 11.
times did we say that?
And we have to assume.
Stop it. And so the CDC, what we found, they said came from Europe. Well, it really was coming from the World Health Organization.
Yeah.
The head of the World Health Organization is still there. Mm-hmm. He's a Chinese operative. And so China was where this supposedly came from. Their response was the first one. The WHO response was what the CDC was just not being American. It was just following the World Health Organization, which isn't necessarily a national, a United Nations organization, but definitely is swimming with the same partners. Mm-hmm. So, to say there's a conspiracy, to say that this was engineered, executed in such a way, and then now to come out and say it was improper and it was Trump's fault.
Right.
It is really kind of what's being said, but nobody's apologizing.
They're just from the beginning.
This is what medically we say. So you're saying it's a vocabulary word that's the problem,
right?
Convenient data set. Right. So the problem is we need to change our vocabulary. We need to change our culture. That's what they're saying.
Yeah, and why would the hospitals be slow in reporting the data in a time like that?
Exactly.
I mean, it's insane.
And yet people were told, shut up. The media got on it. People were bullied. It was just absolutely insane. And this is trying to rewrite history. Now let's look at President Biden. This is just a little shot of him saying that the pandemic's over.
Let's give this a little context.
Okay.
This is not a press conference. This is not, I need to make an announcement.
Right.
This is him casually walking on the floor of the Detroit Auto Show.
Yeah. With Scott Pelley from 60 Minutes.
And is just going to get casually asked about the pandemic. Okay. So.
The pandemic is over. We still have a problem with COVID. We're still doing a lot of work on it. But the pandemic is over. If you notice, no one's wearing masks. Everybody seems to be in pretty good shape. And so I think it's changing, and I think this is a perfect example of it.
And so this is, obviously Biden's got his own problems.
Sure.
But here's a guy in government for 50 years going with whoever's paying him or whatever, going with the program. And so we were saying, it's not a pandemic. It's not a pandemic. It's not a pandemic. It's not zombie-like people dying in the streets and blood squirting out of their eyes and all this kind of stuff.
Do you remember at the beginning, though? Oh, go ahead. I'll come back to that. But
what I'm saying is, and so it was never a pandemic. It was a bad flu season.
Yeah.
It's what it is. And that's
the data shows
what they're saying now. It's just a bad flu season. It's no different than less people died than from the flu season.
Yeah.
So what were you saying?
No, it was at the beginning of this whole thing, they showed that footage of people keeling over in the streets in China and the people showing up with the hazmat suits to carry them off. And so people had this idea that this was literally the plague.
Right.
And they were utilizing media to scare everybody. Right. So that type of response, that's not by mistake.
Right.
Even though these people are now saying, we made a mistake. No, that's not a mistake. There was some coordinated effort that was happening to make people respond to this
Trump was saying China virus. We're not going to let them beat us in business, right? And so he got elected on that.
Yeah.
So then China fought back, but China fought back with this.
Yeah.
With their bogus concept, and that totally changed us. And now we've got Biden in, whose son is involved in questionable trade with China and Ukraine and everybody else. And Trump was trying to say, we're not going to support Ukraine because they're doing this stuff with Biden's son and what's going on. And they're saying, well, you're with Russia, And so all this kind of stuff was going on. And so this was all politicized, and this was all tit for tat strategy on really who's going to be in power and whose mindset's going to be in there. Let's go to the WHO director. And I don't have his name down here. This is the World Health Organization Director General.
Last week, the number of weekly reported deaths from COVID-19 was the lowest since March 2020.
Okay, so it's over. We're back to...
We have never been in a better position to end the pandemic.
Hold on, pause that.
We've never been in a better position to end, you end it?
Pandemic has a definition, by the way.
Right. No, but so
you can't just end it.
We define it, we call it, and now we uncall it.
Right.
Yeah, and so pandemic is not what we think it is. Pandemic is what they say it is.
Right, exactly.
Based on flawed data.
Yeah.
And so you put all these things together, and it is maddening because it is very clear that we let the animals out of the zoo and they were running the show for a couple of years, and the whole world got turned topsy-turvy.
And it's maddening because we've been saying this for a long time.
Yeah.
And anyone who, like I said, questioned it was just made out to be this horrible shell of a human being.
Yeah.
And so people went and hid and said, I'm not going to speak out against it because I don't want to.
Yeah. And suffered. No clear sorry. We were wrong. Please forgive us. Nothing there. the consequences are still standing there stacked up. Nobody really addressed that. And the government and media culturally bullied and pressure everybody down. And so that ought to be a lesson that this can happen. This can happen. What are the remaining questions? And I have them right here. What was it? It was this cytoxaline response. It was an allergic response to your own system fighting something.
Right.
That's not natural. That's unnatural. This is man-made. Fauci was in on it. Mm-hmm. They were trying to do stuff. Well, maybe just Fauci, but the system was doing this, and somebody decided to utilize it for this grand experiment. Where did it come from? Might have come from China labs, but who funded those China labs? Who cooperated with the China labs? American universities who got money from Fauci.
Right.
How do we deal with it when it comes up next? Well, we're going to rewrite the CDC culture so that we're calling the shots,
right?
And we're going to do it better than we did last time. And so mandates,
right?
Mandates, because people are still saying wash your hands, wear a mask, get in the lines, take the shot, get the booster.
Even though there is no data,
right?
Still, that proves that any of that stuff worked. Matter of fact, the data that is been presented is showing that it actually made it worse and it made it last longer.
And so, the scientific community with government pay is tyranny.
Mm-hmm.
They have government, media, education, military obliging them, all for fear of death or my job loss. That's what Putin's doing right now in Russia. I mean, so who's going to pay for the consequences? So those are the questions that I have asked. And of course, with our election system now jacked, who knows?
But I think for a second to hit on the media during this time, every conservative voice silenced, shadow banned, taken off platforms, not able to talk about it.
Yep.
And the media that went along with the big plan or the big play was lifted up, shown in your face every day, press conferences every morning, plastered all across your Facebook, all across your YouTube, every TV commercial, and put out there. And so either the media is complicit in this, which obviously they are, or people were oblivious. I don't think so. So the response, not just the response from the powers that be, certainly had this engine of the media pushing it out to make people respond the way that they did.
I'm not going to say that Fauci wants to run the world or whatever. Biden joked that Fauci's the real president of the country, which is funny because he's worked the system.
Yeah.
He's a puppet working the system. And so if I create the virus and I create the response to the virus and then what fixes the virus, then I'm going to make money all along the end. I think that's more what he is, just a selfish type, person or whatever.
Sure.
But I think more evil persons like Klaus Schwab writing the book COVID-19, The Great Reset, they're learning from this trial run how to establish global governance and control through chaos and crisis. And they just now have it all together, so whatever comes next is going to be an avalanche.
Yeah.
And I think we're being set up for whatever. And it could be anything. It could be just response to natural disaster, to war, to certain factions of people. Like, Biden just got up and, there was red lights on Constitution Hall and Marines with folded hands in the back, and he's saying, MAGA Republicans are the enemy of democracy.
Domestic terrorists.
Yeah, domestic terrorists. And he's inciting civil war. And, of course, then if something breaks out, they can respond, and then everybody is going to have loyalty badges or whatever else, to go down. And so this has been a great lesson in, that those in power need to be removed, need to be replaced.
Right.
People need to stand up and do. And if we don't do that, if we just kind of hush back, we're going to get more of the same.
Well, and the question is, you said lesson. Has the lesson been learned? It was amazing to me how quickly people just gave up their freedoms. I mean, even people I'm not doing this. I'm going to stay home. I'm going to wear my mask. They just gave it up. No questions asked. But it's even more amazing to me how many people have just forgotten.
Yeah.
And gone back to normal. And now are not thinking, I got to prepare myself for the next time this happens, but just getting back to comfortable, back to watching the Kardashians, back to just getting lulled to sleep like we were before. Obviously, we've seen a lot of activism come out of this. We've seen a lot of people running for office. And they're all losing. And so people are just going back, we can't beat the system. We're just going back to normal. And so although there has certainly been a lesson, have we actually learned the lesson? Has anything changed? Will we be ready this next time?
Fold.
Can we even?
Don't stand up to it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
And you know, I was involved with a gubernatorial campaign. You were running for governor, and all of the political consultants, every single one of them, were telling the candidate I was working with, don't talk about COVID. People don't want to hear it anymore. Right. Don't talk about the vaccine. Don't talk about mandates. Right. Don't talk about shutdowns. Don't talk about lockdowns. Don't talk about Whitmer. Those things, we got to focus on the economy. We got to focus, even the conservatives, because we just got to get past that. We got to get over that. And that's what happened is people forget.
Yeah.
This is why the government can get away with this stuff.
Well,
because
you think about it. We had 9/11.
Yeah.
Right? And then, not that next presidential election, but the next presidential election, we elected for president a guy named Barack Hussein Obama, very similar to Hussein and Osama bin Laden. And so, people forget. And it's just, Governor Whitmer, we had 250,000 people come out and shut Lansing down and say, we don't want your mandates.
Right.
And then even leftist parents who would vote unions for education and everything else said, wait a minute, you can't, our kids are going to the football game and the dance and you can't do this. Right? So even that, but now everyone has forgotten that.
Yeah.
Everyone has just
so
absolutely
the lesson has not been learned.
Lesson has not been learned.
Yeah.
And, 9/11, everybody joined hands saying kumbaya, and all of a sudden we were good and we fought this war and everything else that we did. Here we've come together and we've done that. And just like we have a pre and post 9/11 world, we have a pre and post COVID-19 world. And really, it's satanic in its inspiration because it's taking us towards this globalist ideal where we're just universal it's.
Well, and part of the agenda is to silence the Christian, right?
Absolutely.
And that has certainly worked because you see Christians, the majority of them, obviously we're blessed to be a part of a church that just pushed back, but they've gotten more and more silent, don't want to push back because what they have done, the media, whoever you want to call it, they have likened any pushback on this to hate, unlove. So then now you're not just pushing back, you're now hateful, racist, homophobic, xenophobic. They put you up. So people don't want all those labels, and so they just back off. And so any of the resistance that would have been there has now been probably at least cut in half, maybe more.
Yeah.
Because people are afraid to speak out because of the backlash that was put on them.
These consequences are things we've not rebounded from.
Yeah.
This fundamentally changed the country and people and institutions, and we're not rebounding with them, with Biden saying it was the Trump administration and the CDC saying, we're going to have a new culture. And, well, that was just how we did things. So a real apology is, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I was wrong. Please forgive me.
Yeah.
How can I help you with the consequences that I helped create?
How can we pay you back? Yeah.
And honestly, this has been couched now for the last month as, the apology. It's all been apologized for, and now we're good. Let's go on.
Let's move on.
But there's been no apology, and there's been no real consequences answered.
Yeah.
In regards to that, and so in a Bible nation, the Bible has to rule, and I think people who have Bible sense and spiritual discernment right away said, the math doesn't add up here.
Yeah.
And listen, we were right.
Yeah.
The math didn't add up there. We were right.
Right.
And so, folks, keep standing. Stand stronger. The next time something comes out, let's unify and let's stand strong and let's say, let's let the private sector come up with it. Let's let religious liberty come up with the answers. But we're not going to separate our families. We're not going to not go to church. We're not going to stop doing these things. We're going to do this. Yeah. And then we're going to have to stand firm against it because it was tyrannical. It did take power. It is trying to rewrite the narrative. There isn't really an apology going on here. Right. And we're going to get more of the same if we don't maybe try to work the next election.
Yeah.
Really publish history as it's supposed to be, or if we don't come together and stand stronger.
Yeah, and people maybe seem demoralized. The people that have pushed back and fought back, and now they still, in our own state here, the pushback that happened, hundreds of thousands of people coming together in activism and rally, and Governor Whitmer's still going to probably get another 4 years. And people just feel demoralized, and that's why having your foundation be the Word of God.
Absolutely. Yeah, and
because
Facebook has already deleted the whole thing. It was a day that never happened.
Because as a Christian, you know the end of the story. We win. So don't be demoralized. Don't lose hope. The hope is in the Lord.
Amen.
And we're going to go through it, and we might be the generation that has to go through the last days.
Yeah.
Every generation probably thought they were that. We might be the generation that's literally in the last days.
And if not the last days when God comes back and the earth, sadly the last days of a American republic.
Yeah.
With freedoms.
Yeah.
I mean, and so that's sad too. I think we should resist as much as we possibly can. But absolutely, I think you're right.
Thou will keep
never
him.
lose hope.
Thou will keep him in perfect peace, whose mind is stayed on thee.
And that is always the answer.
Yeah.
Is to have hope in the Lord Jesus Christ.
Peace that passes all understanding.
Amen. Well, thank you, Tony. Thank you, Zach. And we look forward to having Pastor Jason Georges back for our next podcast.
I think we do better without him.
Yeah, let's not let him back on what's going on. He needs to apologize for what's going on. Don't forget to go to BibleNation.org, check out all of our books and articles, merchandise, and all of our other podcasts. And remember, folks, the best culture is a Bible culture. It's proven and it works.